to look out at all of you who are gathered here today, to listen to that magnificent music and to anticipate all that God is going to do through our time together is nothing less than thrilling. It was last January, there were 7 of us who got together on the whimsical notion of saying, well, let's dare to think through a new way of being Presbyterian for the 21st century. And I do not exaggerate or joke when I say to you, the very first thought we pondered is, let's think of a way of being the church that's so exciting, we'll look forward to going to the meetings. You might as well dream. And the second thought was, this way of being the church, we wanted to love so much that it really wouldn't matter if the rest of the Presbyterian Church USA just rolled their eyeballs and our big dream went straight to DVD. We still were so passionate about what we were dreaming up that we would still pursue it, even if it was just the 7 of us. Well, 2 hours stretched into 2 days, and that little circle of 7 people has expanded and expanded and expanded and expanded until here we are tonight, gathered around the dream of a global Presbyterian fellowship as a way of renewing our congregations and, by God's grace, enriching the entire worldwide Church of Jesus Christ in the 21st century. Now, first of all, we are Presbyterian. We are rooted in the connectional nature of the church, grounded in the theology of our Book of Confessions. We are global. We seek to transcend the boundaries of nation and ethnicity and race and culture. We want to move beyond the old model of mission that is simply sending great gobs of money from the West to the rest. We want to transcend the myopia and materialism of our own Western culture. My own awakening to this came to me, it was several years ago when I went to study on sabbatical at St. George's College in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. And as a pastor of a church here in the United States, I knew I'd be working and studying with numerous pastors from the developing world and assumed that they would be desperate for the kind of resources that we have so readily available to us here in the United States. And so when I went, I brought with me a stash of mission money. And secretly, I must confess publicly now, I thought of myself as a kind of traveling Santa Claus who was going to visit this great pile of resources on some unsuspecting but no doubt very grateful young pastor from a developing nation. And I remember one night at St. George's there was a young, brilliant Malaysian pastor who shared a dream of starting a school in his church. And I took Paul aside afterwards and I said, Paul, I want to talk with you about something. And feeling, of course, like I was visiting upon him something like the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, I said, George, Paul, I brought some money. I'd like to give you $10,000 for helping you launch your school. Well, imagine my utter shock when he looked at me and he said, well, Vic, I really appreciate you being willing to do that. But you see, if I were to return to my country with that kind of money on me as a Christian pastor, they would take away that money right at the airport and they would put me in jail. And so, but there is a way you can really help me. I could tell he was so solicitous of my feelings. But I really do want you to help me. And the way that you can be of help to me is, would you be my prayer partner during these several weeks that we're going to be together here? I need your help, and what I need is your prayer. And I'd like to pray with you for your congregation. Would that be all right? And all of a sudden, so much for the strong Western pastor who was helping the desperate have-not pastor from the East. And over the next few weeks, I found myself sitting under the spiritual authority of my dear Malaysian brother. We are Presbyterian, we are global, and we are a fellowship. We seek to renew the church through bringing together bonds of fellowship in horizontal partnerships around the world. We do not seek to be all things to all people. We're not called the Presbyterian Global Panacea. We thought about that, we did not. We don't think of ourselves as the Presbyterian Global Juggernaut. We are congregations loving the world in Jesus' name. And we are not another organization seeking for control. We simply want to demonstrate a hopeful way of being Presbyterians in the 21st century. I believe that we have biblical precedent for the moment at which we find ourselves, and that is Elijah facing down the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And you remember at that moment, Elijah just has the showdown. He says, listen, you call on your God, and I'll call on my God. The God who answers by fire is God. The world loves that kind of a showdown. And what the world is demanding of us today as Christians is that we put up or shut up, that we deliver something that is real and tangible before the world. They're asking, what difference does your religion make in the real world? In Elijah's day, the faith of Israel no longer enjoyed exclusive allegiance among the people. Just as today in our society, mainline churches no longer have a preferred status in today's Western culture. And today, as back then, now the church, we in our churches have got to somehow prove ourselves on display in the open in a demonstration of dynamism and reality before the world. The church in America today, people are not impressed that America was founded by Christians or that George Washington knelt in the snow at Valley Forge. What they are saying is, show us something real. Show us how your gospel is good news for us in facing the yearnings of our hearts. And if you can't do that, please stop bothering us with your mere words. The prophets of Baal are doing pretty well in our society today because there's so much evidence for the powerlessness of Christianity. There are a lot of Christian politicians who are under investigation and even indictment for illegal and unethical behavior. There are Christian priests and pastors who've not only committed sexual immorality, but some of the most heinous sexual crimes imaginable. We've got Christian pro-athletes who are just as spoiled rotten as non-Christian pro-athletes. We have American Christian marriages that are disintegrating in many cases just as fast as non-Christian marriages. And meanwhile, in a few months, the world's going to hear a lot of Christians whining over how they're all conspiring against us so we can't say Merry Christmas to each other. And I don't blame the world for scratching their head and saying, what is it with these Christians? Well, what the world is, they're on Mount Carmel, and they're looking at us and saying, show us something real that will make a difference in the world today, something that will demonstrate the good news. And if you can't do that, please at least admit that your religion is simply a way for you to find comfort, and it's not the big answer for all people that you claim that it is. It's painful to acknowledge that the Presbyterian Church USA has been in recent decades among the most powerless branches of Christendom. And now there's certainly some great exceptions to that. The power of our global partnerships. We have congregations that are growing and excited, and many of them represented in the room here tonight. But according to the National Council of Churches statistics, of the 25 largest denominations in the United States, Presbyterians are losing more than any others, both in raw numbers and in percentage. And the fastest shrinking denomination, losing more than 50,000 members a year. My friends, how can we stand aside and watch the free fall of this once great denomination without doing something? And our response is the Presbyterian Global Fellowship. Now, we're not here during this time. You should have caught the feeling. It's not a sob fest. It's not an ain't it awful time. It's a time when we really desire for God, perhaps over the next couple of days, to begin a turnaround in our denomination that will lead us into a hopeful future. And to do that by linking us with global Christians around the globe. Because if you want to see something really exciting, go look at the Presbyterian Church of East Africa, or the Presbyterian Church of South Korea, or the Presbyterian Church of Northern India, or the Presbyterian Church of Brazil. You see Presbyterians in fuego, on fire, in ways that we could hardly imagine in our United States. And meanwhile, in the West, what we see is a lot of decline. One of our elders is here sitting on the front row, and I remember he just got back from Scotland, and he wasn't aware of the dynamics of global Christianity, and he said, Vic, it was so depressing. He was over there on a golfing vacation. He said, Vic, I couldn't believe it. On every other corner, there was a Presbyterian church that was getting turned into a disco, a bar, or a restaurant. But meanwhile, in Asia and Africa, they're renting out huge soccer stadiums in order to find room for all the Christians to get together and worship. Friends, we have so much to learn from a Presbyterian Global Fellowship. Let me explain in my own way the crisis that we face in our mainline denominations. I'm going to use a couple of visual aids up here. Someone took it away. All right, now, somebody. So Oh, well, I don't, I'll verbalize it here. I put it here, 15, okay. A rotary dial telephone. Envision a rotary dial telephone. And if you have it near you, you bring it up here. It is surfboard yellow, if you see it. It's a surfboard yellow rotary dial telephone. I actually showed this rotary dial telephone to one of our administrative assistants this past week, who is in her mid-20s, and she looked at it and said, "What is that? I've never seen one of those before." But you remember, if you grew up in the 50s, don't you love that color? Oh my gosh, isn't that something? So anyway, but a rotary dial telephone, for those of you who are in your mid-20s, this is what that is. And when this came out, it was a magnificent breakthrough. For the first time, you didn't have to talk to an operator, and you could dial a number yourself. I mean, it was hard to be humble if you were the first kid on your block to have a rotary dial phone that you had in your home. And some of you remember that there are these special little sticks you had with a ball on the end so you could dial real fast. And some of you had this experience where you stuck your finger in on the 9 and you went all the way around and almost cut the end of your finger off. Remember that? Well, now the other thing we have over here is we have a cell phone. There's a part of me that wishes we were still in this world, because back then you couldn't bring your phone to church. Yeah. Remember? No, couldn't interrupt the worship service. But this phone here is one I can walk anywhere. I can actually voice dial. I can say Scott Weimer. It's off right now, but I could call Scott by just saying his name. This is one I can surf the net on. I can get my email. If I knew how, I could pay my bills on this thing. This doesn't have the capacity for photography, but some of you have phones that have the capacity for photography. The point I'm trying to make is, what an amazing evolution we've seen, staggering, in the technology of telephones from the 1950s until today. Let me tell you what is equally staggering: how unevolved is the Presbyterian denominational system since the 1950s. We have a rotary dial phone system. And if you think for a moment of all of the things that organizations have had to shed in terms of cultural baggage and assumptions since the 1950s in order to stay viable as time has gone on and to still be around and vibrant in the 21st century. Things that have to been left behind are hierarchy, bureaucracy, centralization, things like assuming a culture of experts where those experts know better for us what's good for us better than we do, an assumption of loyalty without active accountability, poor communication, amorphous goals. All these are things that have had to be left behind. And organizations that have not done that have been fading and dying. And that includes, in our case, our Presbyterian denominational structure. Now, I want to hasten to add, and I want every one of you to hear this. This is not an attack on the good folks who are working in that structure. One of the things I was thinking this past week is that you could have the smartest, most talented, brilliant people in all the world gather together, and with all their efforts, they could not convince us to go back to using the rotary dial phone system. I mean, you could have Bill Gates and Warren Buffett teaming together and having Catherine Zeta-Jones as your public spokesperson, and still you would not get all of us to set aside our cell phones and say, hey, I'm going to continue to use my rotary dial phone system. It's just not going to work. And so the evolution has been something that has not worked for us. Another thing that happened in the 50s is you could say to people, look, yes, we may be not that effective, and it may not be what you want, but you know, we're your brand. Remember in the 50s you had to buy whatever Detroit produced, and you were unpatriotic if you bought a Japanese or a European car. But what's happened is we now have an openness about people's choices about cars. Guess what? There has been a renewal movement in Detroit, and Detroit is making better cars. Is there a way to create that same miracle of renewal in Louisville, perhaps through some of those same principles? There's a kind of thinking that says, well, we acknowledge that some of you are going around our rotary dial system and you are using your cell phone And that's all right, as long as you continue to give us resources so that we can keep the rotary dial industry alive. Because if you really must know, we have a suspicion down in our hearts that the cell phone is really just a passing fad. And there is going to be a glorious morning when the whole world comes to its senses, and we're all going to come running back to our rotary dial phones, and we're going to want to have them. And we want to be ready when the awakening comes. Folks, that's yesterday, this is tomorrow, and the change has got to happen. Now, here's the deepest conflict in Presbyterianism today as I see it, and that is this. There are some people who want to solve the problem of our shrinking, declining denomination in the following manner. What they say is the problem is not with our rotary dial phone system. The problem that turns off the unchurched people of the world is the antiquated message that they're hearing that comes through our rotary dial system. And how can we, in this world of pluralism and diversity, this world of freedom of expression, continue to say these antiquated things like Jesus is the one way to God, or continue to use the Bible as our basic principle for sexual ethics in a way, this book that so constrains people in their self-expression sexually? We can't do that. Well, my friends, we at Presbyterian Global Fellowship strongly disagree with that way of solving the problem. In fact, we want to put all of our resources into creating the new phone with the old message, the message of the historic confessions of the Presbyterian Church. We absolutely reject... We say no to the old phone with a new message, and we say yes to the new phone with the great old message of the saving grace of Jesus Christ through his cross for all people around the world. And we really mean using the technologies of the 21st century. One of the things we want to do very, very quickly is put together a state-of-the-art website that links us in this fellowship of congregations all the way around the world. Could you imagine what it would be like for us to be able to do things like take the great preaching of a South Korean or an East African pastor and be able to download that preaching into our Sunday school classes right here in the United States? We have crazy dreams like having a Presbyterian Reformed Wikipedia with thousands of articles in theology. I didn't think that was funny. I thought that was pretty cool. And sermons and Bible studies, the sharing of best practices among small congregations and large congregations, a way of cross-fertilizing and being in constant contact with each other through our web presence. One of you told me today that the first Reformation was started through the printing press. Well, there's ready to have a brand new Reformation that's going to take place perhaps through the internet, and we want to be a part of helping to launch that through our Presbyterian Global Fellowship. Here's one of my favorite dreams. Can you imagine to see breaking news of a nation in crisis and then instantly be able to go online and get real-time prayer requests from Christians on the ground in that terrible situation, to be able to correspond with them, to encourage them, and to receive from them the encouragement and the strengthening of their faith? We're so excited about pouring our resources into the new phone with the old message. In order to do that, we would like to take resources away from the old phone and the new message. And hear me, within the Presbyterian Church USA. Not leaving the Presbyterian Church USA, but reforming and being reformed within the community that we love of the Presbyterian Church USA. Well, friends, meanwhile, we're up on Mount Carmel. And the world is looking at us, and the world is saying, well, show us what you got. Show us the proof in your pudding. What do you got to show me? And we better come up with something. Well, friends, what is the secret of power in the Christian life? The Apostle Paul tells us, and I hate to say it this way, but believe it or not, there's no other way other than we ourselves have got to crawl up onto the altar on Mount Carmel. What has to catch fire is our own lives. As the Apostle Paul says, he says in Romans 12:1, he said, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. I tell you, the sickness of the Presbyterian Church USA is a sickness that I have within myself, and I see it every day, and that is a lukewarm spirit. The more I live, the more I see that New Testament Christianity requires an intensity of focus that I don't give to it on a daily basis. And I believe that we have got to somehow redefine normal Christianity in our culture as being back what it was in the book of Acts. And what was it in the book of Acts? The Apostle Paul tells us in his words to the Galatians. He said, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy. He said, I have been crucified with Christ, and the life I now live is no longer my life, but it's the life that Christ lives in me. A.W. Tozer once said to be crucified with Christ means three things. The person on the cross is facing only one direction. Second, that person is not going back. And third, he has no further plans of its own. I'm finding myself at the age of 58 with a deep need to give myself to Jesus like I did back when I was 16 at Young Life in high school. Or the way I did when I was 19 and I went to the Urbana Missionary Conference in Urbana in 1967 and I committed my life to full-time Christian service. My friends, you can't put soda pop in a jet engine and expect it to fly. And friends, you cannot put a lukewarm commitment in a Christian life and expect to see power. And I yearn for my own life to have a wow factor in my life before God that catches the attention of the world. And for that to happen, I need you. And we together need the global church. And we need God to connect us in new ways with one another. And my prayer is the fire will fall on us over the next 2 days. Glory be to God.